You wake up before the sun does. There's no rooster crowing, just the crackling of last night's dying fire and the shallow, wheezing breath of your younger brother curled beside you. You're both wrapped in a stiff fur blanket, crusted at the edges with old blood and lice. The ground beneath your shoulder blades is cold, hard-packed earth. There's no bed, just straw, and even that is damp. The air in your hut stinks of soot and old fat. Your eyes sting as you blink open. There's no chimney, just a narrow hole in the thatched roof, clogged most days with moss or bird droppings. Smoke from the smoldering fire pit crawls along the ceiling beams and curls down into your lungs. Your cough starts as a dry rasp and ends in something wet. That's normal. Everyone coughs. There are no windows here. Just mud walls pressed with your tribe's fingerprints, still visible if you squint. You helped shape them as a child, smashing clay with bare hands while your mother barked orders. Now the hut leans slightly. One of the poles that supports the back corner is rotten. If it rains again, it may collapse. You push aside the animal skin curtain that separates the sleeping area from the hearth. Outside, morning mist clings to the ground like a second skin. The wind bites through the doorway before you even rise. Your joints ache from sleeping curled too tightly, and your back reminds you you're no longer a child. You shuffle over to the fire pit. The embers are low. You stir them with a charred stick and add dried dung and twigs. Sparks fly. Smoke thickens. You blink again, wiping your eyes with the back of your wrist, crusted with dirt from yesterday's hunt. No soap. No water nearby. Just spit and sleeve. Breakfast? If there's any left from last night, it'll be bone broth, thin and greasy, with gristle and a single bitter root floating in the pot. You scrape the bottom with a wooden ladle, hoping no bugs fell in overnight. Hunger sits in your belly like a coiled snake, familiar and dull. Your teeth hurt, again. You press your tongue against one molar. It shifts slightly. You ignore it. Outside, the village is already stirring. A dog limps past your doorway, ribs visible. Children fight over a cracked bone. Smoke drifts from every hut, mingling into a choking gray sky. The cold stays in your bones until at least midday. You'll be gathering wood or scraping hides today. If you're unlucky, you'll be digging graves again. Old fever has taken 3 more in the last moon. There's no privacy, no escape, no calendar. Just the sound of someone wailing 3 huts down and the sharp snap of bones cracking over a cooking fire. Your tools are bone. Your knives, chipped stone. Your hands, always raw and swollen from work. If someone cuts themselves, you pack it with moss and whisper a prayer to the sky. If someone's sick, you hum, chant, burn herbs. If someone's in pain, real pain, the kind that won't stop, you call the healer. You've seen what he does. You've smelled the blood, the way they cut into skulls to let the evil out. You've never been close, but you've heard it. The screams, the sudden silence, and sometimes, miraculously, the footsteps days later of the ones who lived. But most don't. You rub your temples. That dull ache is still there. You don't say anything. You don't want them to notice. You don't want to be next. You breathe in smoke. It stings. You swallow it down. It's just another morning. Just another Monday. Your head throbs again. Not sharp, not sudden. Just that same pressure, like something inside is swelling against your skull. You think maybe it's from the smoke, or the cold, or the lack of food. You don't really know. No one does. Sickness doesn't have a name here. There's no word for infection or bacteria. You just feel off. And when you do, the others start to look at you differently. It begins quietly. Your nose runs all day. You wipe it on your arm until the skin burns. You shiver in the sunlight while others sweat. A bruise on your leg turns black, then green. You scratch at it, but it won't stop spreading. You've had fevers before. They come with dreams, long, heavy ones where you forget your own name. Sometimes you wake up covered in sweat and bruises from thrashing around. One time you woke to find your sister tying a knot around your ankle, just in case you tried to wander into the fire pit again. You've seen others go worse. The woman 2 huts down, the one with the missing fingers, she used to be strong. One day, she couldn't stop vomiting. By the next, her mouth was covered in white sores. By the third, she was gone. And it's not just fever. Your teeth hurt constantly. You chew bark, hoping the bitterness will distract you. You suck on pebbles to keep saliva flowing. Still, your gums swell. One tooth cracked last winter. It bled for days. The healer pressed moss into it and blew smoke around your face. It didn't help. You still wake with blood on your tongue. There's something wrong in your gut too. Always has been. Sometimes your belly swells even when you've eaten nothing. Sometimes it knots up and twists until you cry. Other times, you just can't stop going. You squat in the bushes, again and again, hoping no one sees. You're too ashamed to say anything. Everyone else has had it too, but no one talks about it. Your water isn't clean. You drink from the same stream the animals piss in. You've seen bits of fur, bone, and rot float past. You try to boil it, but wood is scarce, so you drink it cold, muddy, full of little things that make your stomach growl and your head feel fuzzy. At night, you feel bugs crawling under your skin. You know they're there, even when you can't see them. You scratch and scratch until the sores open. You try not to cry. Crying means weakness. Weakness means risk. Risk means being noticed by the wrong people. You've watched the healer work. He doesn't really heal. He chants. He rubs ash into wounds. He breaks eggs and reads the yolks. Sometimes he cuts. With a flint blade he keeps wrapped in deerskin, stained dark from too many uses. He says the spirits are angry. You wonder if they live in your skull now. If that pressure behind your eyes is one of them pushing to get out. You mentioned the pain once, just once, to your cousin. He stops chewing and looks away, says nothing. But later that night, you see him whispering to the elder woman near the fire. You can't hear what they say, but you know what it means. They think you're marked. You've seen it before, when people start to talk in their sleep. When they shake for no reason. When they stare too long into the fire. The tribe thinks those people are cursed, or chosen. Either way, the healer is called. And when the healer is called, the flint blade follows. So you keep quiet. You grip your aching head. You suck your cracked teeth. You sit in silence, hoping the sickness passes on its own. And when it doesn't, when it gets worse, you still pretend. Because pretending means time. And time, for now, means safety. You're sick. Always. But you survive. That's what matters. It finally happens when you least expect it. One moment, you're out near the riverbank, hauling back a basket of roots. The next, your foot catches on something, a root or a rock, and you hit the ground. Not just a stumble. You fall hard, your head bouncing off the earth with a dull, bone-deep thunk. The world tilts. A flash of white. Then darkness. When you wake, the sky has changed colors. Your basket is gone. Your head pulses like a drum. Someone's hovering over you, a cousin or friend, maybe. They speak softly, but the words drift like mist. You can't quite catch them. Your ears ring. Something is wrong. By nightfall, your head still aches. You see double. Lights flicker where none should be. You try to walk but stagger. That's when they begin to whisper. To them, this isn't just an injury. It's a sign. The fall was no accident. It's the spirits, they say. Maybe something inside you is broken. Or maybe something wants to come out. They bring you to the healer. He doesn't ask what hurts. He doesn't press gently or offer comfort. He looks at your eyes, one is swollen. He touches the base of your skull and nods grimly. You try to speak, but the words don't come out right. He says the spirits have gotten inside you. That the pain is a symptom. That you're lucky it's still early. They light the fire higher than usual. Not for warmth, but for smoke. Thick, heavy smoke meant to cleanse the air. Meant to thin the veil between this world and the next. Around you, the others sit silently, eyes lowered. You are the center of the ritual now. You're laid on a stone slab, barely warmed from the fire. Your arms are bound, not tightly, just enough so you don't move when the pain comes. Because it will come. They all know it. And there's nothing to dull it. The healer unwraps his tools, a polished flint shard, obsidian flakes, a piece of antler with a smooth, rounded tip. They're stained dark. From use. He doesn't tell you what he's going to do. You already know. This isn't treatment. It's a passage. An offering. A plea to the unseen. He chants first. Not quickly. Slowly. Rhythmically. Each word is an old word. A sacred word. He draws signs in ash across your forehead, then places a carved bone between your teeth. You're not told to bite. It's understood. Then he begins. The first scrape isn't deep. Just enough to break the skin and trace the shape he'll carve. You feel the warmth of your own blood before you smell it. The chanting never stops. Then he presses harder. The bone between your teeth cracks. You feel everything. He scrapes in a circle. Over and over. Tiny flakes of bone lift with each motion. Your skull sings with pain. Your eyes fill with tears. Not from emotion, but from your body's desperate, useless attempt to shield you. You want to scream, but your throat is frozen. The body saves its energy. The healer keeps going. Eventually, after minutes that feel like hours, there's a change. A pressure shift. A sudden, cold air on something that should never feel air. The healer stops chanting. He places a hand on your chest, whispering low. You don't hear the words. You only feel the hand. In the silence. Then, just as suddenly, it ends. He smears clay over the hole, packs it with moss, wraps your head with strips of leather and plant fiber. You are carried back to your hut, silent and trembling. You don't know if the spirits are gone. You don't know if they were ever real. All you know is that something sacred or terrible just happened to your skull. And if you survive the night, you won't be the same. You think they cut into your skull to heal you. That's what you want to believe. But healing isn't really what this is about. There are no diagnoses here. No anatomy scrolls or careful observation. No names for things like concussion or epilepsy or intracranial pressure. There's only what can be seen and what can't. And when something can't be seen, it must be felt or feared. They say when someone hears voices or sees flashes of light, when they twitch or groan in their sleep, it's not sickness, it's spirits. Something wrong inside. Not in the body, but in the soul. And a soul must be open to be cleansed. The hole in your skull is not an act of medicine. It's a ritual, an offering, a way of showing the world beyond that the tribe is watching, that it cares, that it's willing to give pain for peace. You are a symbol now. When the healer placed that flint to your head, he didn't do it for you. He did it for the tribe, for the story it will tell tomorrow, for the balance that must be kept between seen and unseen. Because every tribe has its wounds. And every tribe believes some of those wounds must be fed. Your blood, your pain, your breathless cries in the firelight, they feed the story. They keep the evil at bay. They remind the others what happens when you ignore the signs. There's comfort in that, strange as it seems. Your suffering has a meaning. You are not just hurt, you are chosen. They whisper that maybe you've become something different now. That the spirits passed through you but didn't take you. That you've been hollowed and left standing. But it's not you they're grateful to. It's the spirits. They believe the healer didn't remove a disease. He removed a presence. Something that had moved into your head like a snake curling in a cave. Something that made you fall. Something that caused the headaches. Something that had to be let out. That circular wound in your skull? It's not seen as a scar. It's a doorway. A seal broken and left open for a reason. Some believe the spirit might return. Others believe it left forever. They're both right, in a way. Because you are different now. They don't meet your eyes the same way. The children whisper when you pass. The old ones avoid your shadow. You're not quite one of them anymore. Not fully. You've touched something. Or something touched you. And that scares them. You try to remember what happened, but it's all blurs and sounds and heat. You see the healer's face sometimes in your dreams. Not angry, just distant. His eyes looked past you even when he was right there, pressing the blade into your skin. You were a vessel. Nothing more. Some days you wonder if the pain was worth it. Not because you still ache, though you do, but because the silence that follows is worse. You're alive, but now you carry something invisible. Maybe it was a spirit, maybe it left, or maybe it never did. Either way, they didn't do this to cure you. They did this to be seen by the gods. You close your eyes, lying still, listening to the wind pass through the cracks in your hut. And somewhere, deep inside, you wonder if the wind can pass through you, too. They said you wouldn't survive the night. But you did. Your breath still fogs the air. Your heart still beats, though you feel each pulse like a drum against your temple. Your vision is blurry, but you know your name. Or most of it. That's more than many can say. They unwrapped your head this morning. The healer said nothing, just looked, touched the edges of the wound. The clay was cracked. The moss inside had dried and stuck to the blood. He replaced it without a word. You clenched your teeth and didn't make a sound. Pain means you're alive. You remind yourself of that with every breath. Your head is lighter now, but not in the way you hoped. It's not relief, it's emptiness. A hollow sensation, like a piece of you was scooped out and not returned. When you sit too quickly, your ears ring. When you stand, the world tilts. The others laugh and say you're learning to balance again. But they don't laugh too loudly. Because now you're different. You can feel it in the way they speak around you. They still offer food, but they don't sit close. Children peek from behind their mother's legs and whisper, wide-eyed. You're not one of them anymore. You're a reminder, a warning, a maybe miracle. The healer calls you touched. It sounds like respect, but feels like distance. He pats your shoulder with the same hand that held the blade. It shakes slightly, maybe from age, maybe from memory. When the wind blows through the village, you sometimes swear you feel it inside. A breeze that brushes across the raw memory of the hole they carved in your head. No one else seems to feel it. You don't mention it. They might see it as a sign or a threat. Your sleep is broken now. You dream of things that aren't real or aren't supposed to be. Red circles, holodrums, faces you've never met speaking in tongues you almost understand. You wake with your hand over your head, fingers pressed against the bandage, just to check you're still whole. The headaches are less now, but they've been replaced with something worse: stillness. A kind of emptiness behind your eyes, like someone closed a door inside your mind and locked it from the other side. And yet, you're still here. Some call it luck. Others, the will of the gods. The healer takes credit quietly. He doesn't brag, but you can feel it in the way he stands taller now. You are his proof, his victory. The elders gather around you sometimes. They ask questions they didn't ask before. What did you see? Did anything speak to you? Do you feel anything strange? You want to tell them the truth, that mostly, you feel tired, that your skull throbs with every heartbeat, that you hear the wind, and it's not a song, it's a scream. But you don't say that. You nod, or shake your head slowly. You let them see what they want: a survivor, a vessel, a bridge between flesh and spirit. And so, you walk the village path again. You chop wood, carry water, mend nets. Slower now, with a hand always near your temple. The others make way without being told. Some days, you feel pride. You live through something few do. You carry a mark no one can deny. They fear it, but they respect it too. Other days, you wonder if you really lived at all. If part of you stayed behind, buried in that stone slab, dripping into the earth with your blood. You pass the fire pit where the healer still sings at night. You sit and listen and feel the air shift again. There it is, that faint whistle. Not outside, inside. And you close your eyes, knowing that even if you never speak of it again, something in you changed forever the day they opened your skull, not to save you, but to survive themselves. It began, as many great stories do, with a pile of bones. In 1997, deep within the Goyet caves of Belgium, cold, damp hollows carved by millennia of wind and water. A team of archaeologists brushed aside centuries of dust and silence. They weren't expecting anything extraordinary that day. These caves had given up bones before. Reindeer, wolves, even the occasional early human fragment. But this time, what they found looked different. It was a skull, yellowed with time, partially cracked, but mostly intact. And it bore a strange, circular hole, carved with eerie precision, right through the parietal bone. At first, the team assumed trauma. A fatal injury, perhaps. But as they cleaned and examined further, something curious emerged. The edges of the hole were smooth. Too smooth. Not the jagged tear of a blow, but the slow, scraping removal of bone. This was no accident. This was no violence. This was intentional. And suddenly, the cave grew quieter. This was not the first skull with such a mark. Similar finds had been made in France's Insisheim burial site. Others, even more ancient, had been unearthed from burial grounds in Peru and Sudan. But this one, buried in the shadowy silence of the Goyet caves, spoke as clearly as any artifact ever could. Someone, 7,000 years ago, performed brain surgery. There was no modern medicine, no anesthesia, no antiseptic, no scalpels, just stone, bone, and knowledge passed not through textbooks, but through repetition, observation, and courage. The procedure is called trepanation, the deliberate removal of a section of the skull. And it's one of the oldest known forms of surgery ever attempted by humans. The questions immediately followed. Why? Who? Did the person survive? And most of all, who had the hands to do this? It's one thing to cut flesh. It's another to carve into bone. But to carve into living bone, so close to the brain, requires not just strength, but restraint, precision, confidence, a certain stillness of the hand. The skeleton revealed more. The hole was healing, new bone growth had begun at the edges. This was not a fatal wound. The patient, whoever they were, had survived. For days, maybe months, maybe years. And just like that, the shadowy figure behind the flint tool came into focus, not clearly, but unmistakably. A surgeon, the oldest we've ever known. This anonymous healer, this forgotten hand from a forgotten world, had done the unthinkable. They had opened a living skull and closed it again without ending the life inside. They left no name, no drawing, no journal, only a hole, and the whisper of healing. In Peru, similar holes were found in warriors, men with skull fractures patched by trepanation. In France, skulls of children showed evidence of trepanation for what may have been seizures or fevers. Across continents, cultures who never met left behind the same silent testimony. Someone knew how to open the head and sometimes even help. But this skeleton, this single skull in Belgium's darkened cave, wasn't just a victim. It was a survivor. A bridge between pain and purpose. Between ritual and science. And the person who opened that skull? They may have changed everything. Because this wasn't just an accident of curiosity. This was the moment humankind reached past the skin, into the very core of being, and dared to intervene. Without knowing it, that surgeon, whoever they were, stepped into history, into medicine, into myth. And their patient, unknowingly, became proof that healing could be more than herbs and hope. That a stone could be a scalpel. That a cave could be an operating room. And that a hole in the skull could become, strangely, beautifully, a sign of survival. They had no steel, no sterilized gloves, no hospital lights or machines that beep in warning. And yet, they opened a skull. So what did they use? For the Neolithic surgeon, the operating table was often the cold earth. The patient lay still, sometimes held down by others, sometimes by sinew bindings, sometimes only by the weight of ritual and the will to survive. But what mattered most were the tools. Primitive by today's standards, yes. But in the hands of a practiced mind, they were exact, deadly, and on rare occasions, miraculous. The surgeon would have begun with flint flakes, razor-thin shards chipped off from larger cores. These were the scalpels of the Stone Age. Freshly struck flint is sharp, so sharp, in fact, that modern surgeons have sometimes experimented with obsidian for its cleaner cuts than steel. So imagine that same sharpness. 7,000 years ago, the skin would be sliced carefully, methodically. Not with force, but repetition. The goal was not speed. The goal was control. Once the scalp was peeled back, perhaps secured with twine or pressed under weighted stones, the surgeon would move to scrapers. These tools, often made from obsidian or polished animal bone, were used to slowly wear down the outer skull. This is where skill truly mattered. Too much pressure, and the skull would crack. Too little, and the patient would endure hours of scraping for nothing. The surgeon likely worked in circles, slowly thinning the bone until light began to pass through, signaling the final layers. In some cases, they used a drilling technique, rotating a sharpened stick tipped with flint or obsidian between the hands, like starting a fire, to grind away at the bone. Other sites show evidence of a grooving method, where a circle was etched again and again until the center could be popped out cleanly. There was no anesthesia, but there may have been pain remedies, smoke from burning herbs, alcohol from fermented berries, or chewed leaves with mild sedative properties. Enough to dull the edge, never enough to silence it. Blood would have flowed freely. They may have used moss or dried plant fibers as makeshift bandages, pressed tightly into the wound. Ash, clay, and honey may have followed, acting as primitive antiseptics. To keep the area clean? There's evidence that surgeons used clean water poured through hollowed animal bones, like early syringes, to wash the site mid-surgery. Not because they understood microbes, but because centuries of failure had taught them. Clean wounds heal better. Every movement mattered. A single mistake, a slip of the flint, could pierce the dura mater, the membrane protecting the brain, and result in seizures, infection, or death. Yet many skulls show signs of survival. Some even bear multiple trepanations, spaced months or years apart, proof not only of the surgeon's skill but of the patient's trust. And when it was over, the hole was packed. Wool, hair, bark, animal fat, whatever could protect the exposed tissue. A wrapping of hide or woven fabric held everything in place. And then came the watching, the waiting, the hoping. There were no antibiotics, no anti-inflammatory drugs, but somehow some survived. We know because the bone tells us. When a skull heals, new growth forms along the edge, smooth, rounded, pale. It means the body fought back. It means the surgeon didn't go too far. It means that, for all their lack of tools, they had something even more rare: instinct. These weren't butchers. They were technicians of the body, guided by memory, repetition, and something close to sacred reverence. They worked by firelight. They sweated and bled and trembled alongside their patients. And yet, in a world with no books, no universities, no models of the brain, they succeeded. The tools were simple, but the hands that used them? Ancient, steady, and maybe, just maybe, extraordinary. He didn't leave a name, just a skull. A silence interrupted by the soft curve of healing bone. But that was enough. When researchers unearthed the remains, somewhere in the grassy uplands of modern-day France or the arid plateaus of Peru, they knew what they were looking at. Not just death, not just decay, but survival. This skull was human, unmistakably. Adult, but not elderly. Male, by most measures. But what set it apart was the hole, almost perfectly circular, on the parietal bone, just behind the temple. Not smashed, not shattered, carved, and more importantly, healed. New bone had begun to grow around the edges. Smooth, pale deposits of calcium like the rim of a crater left behind by a long-departed comet. It meant the man lived. Not just hours, not just days. Long enough for the body to begin patching the damage. It was the first confirmed evidence of a medical procedure done with intent and met with success. What happened to him before that moment? No one knows for certain. Maybe he was a warrior, struck in the head during a hunt or tribal skirmish. Maybe he was a shaman, plagued by visions and deemed worthy of spiritual cleansing. Maybe he was simply unlucky, born into a world where pain often became ritual, and ritual became the only medicine available. But whoever he was, he must have trusted someone. Enough to lie down, to let them slice, to let them scrape his very skull open under the open sky or the dim flicker of firelight. That trust paid off. What's astonishing isn't just that he lived, but that others did, too. Some skulls from Neolithic burial sites show multiple trepanations, 2, 3, even 4 holes. Not at once. Over time, done years apart. Which means this wasn't some one-time experiment. This was a practiced art, and people returned for it. He returned from it. Imagine waking up with your head wrapped in fur and bark, dried moss clinging to the hole in your skull. The fire still glowing beside you. The taste of iron and smoke on your tongue. The pain so deep it feels like a second heartbeat. And yet, you open your eyes and breathe. And days later, you sit up, eat, speak, walk again. To the tribe, that must have looked like resurrection. To the surgeon, a silent confirmation. No applause, no fame, just a quiet knowing they had done something no one else could. In a way, this unknown man, this patient zero, became a sacred figure. Not by choice, but by chance. His skull is a bridge between worlds, between injury and hope, death and recovery, myth and medicine. He became proof. Proof that pain could be survived, that bone could heal, that the hands that cut could also save. Today, his skull sits in a museum, or perhaps a locked research drawer, labeled with a tag and a number. But the real story isn't in the tag, it's in the scar. That smooth edge tells us what no scroll or tablet ever did, that our ancestors didn't just fear the body, they learned to understand it. Through him, we glimpse the first whispers of surgery. Not war, not violence, care. And the figure who stood over him, the one with the flint and the steady hand, remains unnamed, uncelebrated, and unknown. But they changed everything. Because before them, illness was fate. Injury was final. After them, even death itself had a challenger. Not a god, just a person, with stone tools, a vision, and a patient who lived to tell the story with his bones. There were no textbooks, no mentors, no controlled studies, just bodies and time. Before any surgeon became a savior, they were something closer to a butcher, or perhaps more accurately, a student of the dead. Because in the Stone Age, all learning began with loss. The earliest trepanations weren't necessarily done to heal. They were done to understand. Carving into the skull of a dead tribesman, the prehistoric healer may have first sought answers, not outcomes. Why had the man died screaming? Why had his limbs stiffened? Why had he collapsed after days of headaches and fireborn visions? Cutting into the skull was an act of both curiosity and courage. Imagine it, the smell of rot, the dull resistance of drying skin, the crackling of old bone beneath stone. And yet, they kept going, scraping, chipping, gently peeling back the cap of death in hopes that something inside would reveal itself. It didn't, but something else did. A technique. Some cuts made the skull crumble. Others slid too deep. Some shattered the bone entirely. But once in a while, they got it just right. A shallow groove here, a curved flake there. Patterns began to form. The rounder the cut, the cleaner the edge. The slower the hand, the fewer the fractures. The learning was slow, brutal, and never written down. It was passed not by words, but by repetition, from one hand to another. From an elder's scars to an apprentice's knife. They practiced on animals, too, goats, deer, dogs. It taught them how skulls differed, how brain matter pulsed and recoiled. Sometimes they practiced on the already dead. Other times, perhaps, on the dying. We don't know how many failed. We only know some lived. That was enough. Over generations, trepanation became a ritualized skill. But it was always a balance between terror and technique, superstition and surgery. They learned through trial. And every trial carried a human cost. One flint blade cut too deep. One tremble of the hand. One hesitation in the heat of pain, and the patient never woke again. And still, they kept going. The ritual helped mask the horror. Firelight, chanting, smoke. The healer wasn't just a surgeon, he was a priest, a bridge between worlds. When things went wrong, it was the spirit's will. When they went right, a miracle. Over time, the healer's tent became a kind of laboratory. The tribe began to recognize signs. Headaches that lasted days, sudden collapses, seizures, wounds that swelled with pressure and turned the eyes red. They didn't understand infection or brain swelling, but they saw patterns. And where patterns lived, procedure followed. And so the trepanation evolved. Sometimes they scraped. Sometimes they drilled. Sometimes they grooved a perfect circle and popped the bone free like the lid of a vessel. Each approach was refined, learned not in lectures, but in loss. And those who survived, they became walking proof of progress. Their scars, their strange stares, their changed temperaments, these were studied, remembered, and added to the unwritten knowledge passed between generations. It's tempting to view them as savages with stone tools. But to do so is to miss the miracle. Because behind every skull they opened, there was intention. A willingness to try. To reach into the unknown and come back with something more than death. That's not just primitive medicine. That's the birth of science. A science written in blood and bone. Taught by the silent language of survival. And remembered, not in textbooks, but in the scarred skulls buried beneath our feet. There is no monument, no statue, no ancient scroll carved in their honor. No epic poem preserved their deeds. And yet, we remember them. The first brain surgeon didn't wear a white coat. They didn't ask for consent. They didn't understand the brain. But they understood suffering. And they dared to reach into it. Their name has been lost to time, erased by wind, soil, and the slow crawl of centuries. We do not know their voice, their beliefs, their tribe. We don't even know their gender. The flint blade could have been held by a man, a woman, a child apprentice under the guidance of a dying elder. We'll never know, but the mark they left remains. Every healed trepan skull is a signature, a calling card from a person who stood at the edge of death and pressed forward anyway. They didn't write journals. They left no theory, but they practiced. They learned. And in that learning, painful, imprecise, but relentless, they changed the course of what it means to be human. Because before them, pain was divine punishment. It was endured, feared, accepted. After them, pain became a problem to be solved. That shift from reverence to resistance is one of the greatest leaps in human history. And it didn't begin in marble temples or royal courts. It began in a mud hut, or a forest clearing, or a smoky cave, with one person and one stone. It's easy to imagine them sitting in silence after a procedure, fingers trembling, blood drying on their hands. The patient, still breathing, maybe twitching, maybe speaking, alive. And in that moment, the surgeon doesn't smile. They breathe and begin to clean the blade. They know there will be more suffering, more wounds, more people asking for something that doesn't exist yet, a cure, a chance, a second breath. They won't get a name. They won't be remembered. But they keep going. Today, in the sterile halls of modern hospitals, where machines whisper in fluorescent light and surgeons wear latex and speak in Latin, there's a silent echo of that first healer. Every time a bone saw hums, every time a craniotomy begins, every time someone dares to touch the seat of consciousness itself, we are standing in the shadow of a forgotten pioneer. The neurosurgeons of today study the brain in slices and signals. They use robots and lasers. They map pathways, explore tumors, quiet seizures. But long before MRIs and medical degrees, there was the first cut, the first breath drawn after the wound, the first skull closed again. That is legacy, not built in fame, but in function, not shouted, but whispered in the healing of bone. This surgeon, this nameless soul, belongs to all of us now. A common ancestor not of blood, but of bravery. A quiet reminder that medicine didn't begin in theory, it began in touch. And though we may never say their name, we carry their work every time we choose not to turn away from suffering. Every time we ask, what if we could help? They didn't just open a skull. They opened a door. And we have never stopped walking through it. It wasn't just one tribe. It wasn't just one continent. It wasn't even just one time period. Wherever humans settled, wherever they built fire pits and buried their dead, trepanation followed. Europe, Africa, Asia, South America. From the cold steppes of Siberia to the arid cliffs of the Andes, from Bronze Age burial grounds to Neolithic caves, archaeologists have uncovered skulls with one common feature: a hole. Round, clean, deliberate, and perhaps most curious of all, healed. Trepanation is the only known medical procedure practiced across nearly all early human societies without any known communication between them. No trade routes shared the knowledge. No written language carried it across oceans. Yet, the technique appears again and again, like a whispered secret humanity somehow kept repeating. In France alone, over 40 prehistoric skulls show signs of trepanation. In Peru's highlands, entire burial sites feature rows of skulls with multiple trepanned openings, many with clear evidence of survival. In Kenya and Sudan, ancient graves reveal the same story. In Pakistan, burial mounds from the Indus Valley contain similar signs. In Russia's Altai Mountains, they found skulls from nomadic tribes bearing the same wounds. Thousands of miles apart, thousands of years apart, but the same method. This is the puzzle. How did so many ancient peoples, separated by mountains, oceans, deserts, and centuries, come to perform the same brutal, precise act? There is no clear answer. Some researchers believe it was spontaneous invention, a convergence of human logic in the face of pain. The brain was a mystery, but the skull was accessible. When someone collapsed, when they screamed or convulsed, early healers may have simply tried to relieve the pressure. But others suggest something deeper, something ritualistic. Because trepanation doesn't always appear on skulls with signs of trauma. In many cases, the individuals were otherwise healthy. No cracks, no wounds, just the hole, as if it had been done for another reason altogether. Could it have been spiritual? A rite of passage? A purification? A form of ancient psychiatry? One theory suggests that early people believed the head housed spirits, both good and bad. When someone behaved strangely, saw visions, or collapsed in seizures, it was thought that a spirit had entered them. The hole, then, was a doorway, a way to let the spirit out. Another theory argues the opposite. The hole wasn't about removing something, but welcoming something in. A vision, a trance, a connection with the gods. Trepanation as a means to open the self to the divine. In both cases, the surgery wasn't seen as purely medical. It was also symbolic. In Peru, some skulls show intricate post-surgical decoration, scratched symbols, ceremonial red pigment along the edges. In parts of Siberia, trepanned skulls were found buried apart from the body, suggesting that the head itself became a ritual object after death. In other words, the hole meant more than healing. It meant transformation. And so, as archaeologists uncover more of these ancient patients, the questions grow louder. Was trepanation truly an act of desperation or devotion? Was it done to treat pain or to reveal meaning? Did it begin with a scream or a prayer? There are no clear answers. Only bones. Bones with stories carved into them. Stories without words. The global reach of trepanation isn't just strange, it's unprecedented. No other surgical practice appears in nearly every early society. Not amputations. Not stitches. Not even childbirth-related methods. Only this. Why? We don't know. But perhaps it's because the head, the skull, has always felt like more than just bone. It's where the self lives, where thought begins, where the mystery of being human seems to dwell. To touch it, to open it, to survive it, is to step into a place most people never dared. And somehow, people across every corner of the earth, without knowing one another, did. The first assumption is simple. Someone had a head wound, and someone else tried to fix it. And that's true sometimes, but not always. In fact, some of the most carefully trepanned skulls ever discovered show no signs of trauma at all. No cracks, no bruising, no battle damage, no accidental falls. Just a clean hole in otherwise healthy bone. And that's when the questions begin. Why would ancient people cut into a skull that wasn't injured? It's this strange pattern that has confounded archaeologists for decades. Because if it wasn't to treat an obvious wound, then trepanation must have been for something else. Something invisible. The most obvious modern explanation? Chronic pain, headaches, migraines, pressure behind the eyes. To us, These are medical symptoms. To early humans, they may have felt like omens or curses. Imagine trying to describe a migraine 7,000 years ago. You might say, "The sun is too loud. My head feels full of smoke. There's a hammer inside my skull." In a world where there were no painkillers, no diagnostic tests, no names for neurological pain, how would anyone around you respond? Probably with fear, then ritual, and finally, the blade. Trepanation may have been an early attempt at relieving pressure, a physical answer to a spiritual or emotional problem. And surprisingly, in some cases, it may have even worked. By cutting through bone, slight pressure on the brain may have eased, especially in cases of hematoma or swelling. But pain wasn't the only reason they opened the skull. In many cultures, people believed that the skull was a vessel, a container for the soul, or the spirits, or the wind of thought. And when someone acted strangely, when they wept for no reason, wandered at night, forgot names, or screamed at shadows, it wasn't mental illness. It was possession. And the hole? That was the exit. One theory suggests that trepanation was a form of spiritual cleansing. When someone was believed to be cursed, infected by a spirit, or even blessed in a dangerous way, a hole in the skull offered a kind of release valve. Not of fluid, but of presence. Something unseen, unwanted, and unsettling, escaping through that circle of cut bone. This might also explain why some skulls, especially those found in ceremonial graves, were trepanned with extreme care and then decorated afterward. Red ochre along the rim, fine grooves etched into the surrounding surface. These weren't battlefield surgeries. They were ceremonies. Other theories go deeper, literally. Some anthropologists argue that trepanation may have been used to induce visions, not to treat illness, but to unlock something. Altered consciousness, dream states, out-of-body experiences. The idea was simple: open the skull and open the mind. Modern researchers remain divided. There's no consensus. Was this early psychiatry? A primitive form of neurology? A ritual rebirth? Or a tragic misunderstanding of the body? And yet, even with no clear answers, one truth remains. Trepanation wasn't always about survival. Sometimes, it was about transformation. It may have served different purposes across cultures, just as it does today in our interpretations. Medical, spiritual, social, even symbolic. The skull was more than bone, it was identity. And to alter it was a radical act of both risk and hope. In some burials, the trepanned were buried separately. In others, they were honored, possibly even revered, perhaps seen as changed, cleansed, or connected in a way the untouched were not. And so, with each clean-edged circle carved into a living skull, ancient people were making a statement, not just about pain, but about power. Power to intervene, power to change a fate, power to speak to things no one could see. We look at the hole and wonder what they were trying to fix. But maybe they weren't fixing anything at all. Maybe they were reaching for something just beyond the mind's veil. A mystery that still lingers inside the bone. The skull doesn't speak, but it remembers. Every cut, every crack, every moment of healing or failure is written there in calcium and silence. And for archaeologists, that silence tells a story more detailed than any scroll. Because not every trepanned skull looks the same. Some have smooth, rounded edges, a sign that bone grew back, slowly, across months or even years. Others are jagged, abrupt, halted mid-cut. The edge is still sharp, the bone brittle. No healing, just an open door that was never closed. These differences matter. They divide the dead into two groups, the healed and the unhealed. And each group raises very different questions. The healed skulls are perhaps the most astonishing. They show us that the procedure didn't always end in death, that pain was endured, that the human body cut open without anesthesia, exposed to dirt, blood, ash, and fire, could recover. These people lived, and not just for hours. The evidence of osteogenesis, bone regrowth, tells us they survived long enough for their skulls to repair themselves. The process takes weeks at the very least, sometimes months. A few skulls even show signs of multiple trepanations, years apart, each surrounded by new bone. These weren't experiments gone wrong. These were procedures that worked. And that means something else too, aftercare. Someone must have tended to the patient, kept the wound clean, changed the wrappings, fetched water, fought infection with herbs and smoke and warmth. These were not just surgeries, they were acts of community. Proof that compassion existed long before modern medicine. But the unhealed skulls tell a different story. These are the ones that stop you cold. A hole, halfway done. Bone scraped but not removed. A rim sharp and fresh, with no regrowth at all. They may have died on the table, or shortly after, or perhaps they were already dying. And trepanation was the last attempt to pull them back. In some cases, the cuts are rushed, crude, as if panic had gripped the surgeon's hand. In others, the opening is perfect, yet lifeless, as if the technique was flawless, but the patient was already too far gone. It's here that we begin to wonder. How did ancient surgeons know when to stop? Did they believe they'd failed? Or that the gods had simply chosen not to listen? And more haunting still, did they ever try trepanation after death? Some skulls suggest they did. There are signs of cutting on bone that had already begun to dry, flake, and split. In some cases, trepanation was likely performed post-mortem, not as medicine, but as ritual. A desperate final gesture to save the soul, if not the body. To let something out, or let something in. This contrast, the healed versus the unhealed, isn't just anatomical. It's emotional. It reveals two sides of the same impulse, the desire to help, and the fear of failing. Both are deeply human. In the healed skull, we see hope rewarded, a risk that paid off, proof that the impossible could be done. In the unhealed, we see the cost, the gamble that didn't work, the sacred attempt that ended in silence. Together, they form a kind of prehistoric ledger, a record of every try, every mistake, every miracle, and they remind us of something modern medicine often forgets. That long before science became data, it was courage, bone deep, blood-stained, and unbearably human. To modernize, it was a surgery. To theirs, it was a ritual. Because before there were doctors, there were shamans. These were not scientists. They were bridges between worlds, between life and death, sickness and healing, the visible and the unseen. And when a person convulsed in the firelight, when they screamed from headaches, when they wept without knowing why, it wasn't biology. It was a spirit. Ancient people believed that illness, especially of the mind or head, came from intrusion. A wind had entered. A shadow had nested. A demon, a curse, an ancestral warning. Something had crawled into the skull, and it needed to come out. So the shaman stepped forward, not with a diagnosis, but with ritual. He or she might begin by burning herbs, mugwort, sage, bitter bark that filled the hut with choking sweetness. They would chant, drum, call on animal spirits, touch the patient's chest and whisper words passed down through generations. But sometimes it wasn't enough. Sometimes the spirit was stubborn, and that's when the knife came out. Only it wasn't a knife. It was flint, or obsidian, or antler sharpened to a crescent moon. The cutting wasn't brutal. It was sacred, a ceremonial opening, not just of the skull, but of the soul. The hole became a doorway, a release. Let the spirit out. Let the air in. Let the pressure go. Shamans didn't think of trepanation as medicine. They thought of it as permission. They were asking the spirit to leave, and the blood was its answer. In some cultures, especially in ancient Peru, this was surrounded by symbols. After the hole was carved, the skull was often decorated, lines etched in geometric patterns, red ochre painted around the wound, perhaps a token left beneath the tongue. In other places, the tools themselves were sacred. The flint was not just sharp, it was purified. Only certain people could touch it. Only certain times were right to cut. The moon had to be waning. The wind had to be still. The bones of the ancestors had to be nearby. Because if the ritual failed, if the patient died, it wasn't a failed surgery. It was a sign. The spirit didn't want to leave. Or, it was never a spirit at all. Some trepan skulls were found buried separately. Others were worn as charms. A pendant carved from another person's cranium, worn close to the heart or hung from the neck. To us, it's strange. To them, it was power. Wearing the healed skull of a trepan survivor might bring protection against the same spirits that once entered them. The skull, once opened, became something more. A relic, a talisman, a testimony. And the shaman? He wasn't praised for precision. He was feared and followed. Some may have lived on the edge of the village, neither quite inside nor outside the tribe. Needed, but never fully trusted. Because to open the head was to touch the soul. And not everyone wanted to be touched. Today, we call it folklore, superstition. We dissect the skull and call it history. But the shamans didn't leave books behind. Only holes. And whispers. And in every whisper, we hear the same thing. That what they feared most was not pain. It was the invisible, and what they believed in most was the possibility that something could leave the body and never return. You'd think, after 100 years of research, we'd know for sure. We've carbon dated the bones. We've measured the angles of the cuts. We've mapped where the holes are. We've tracked who lived and who didn't. But still, modern science cannot agree. Why did ancient people drill holes in their heads? Theories abound. Some say it was purely medical, relieving pressure, removing bone shards, treating cranial trauma. Others insist it was spiritual, purging evil spirits, unlocking the soul, seeking visions. Still others believe it was social, an initiation rite, a badge of survival, a mark of divine favor. Each theory holds pieces of truth. Each also leaves something out. For example, if trepanation was purely medical, why do we see it on skulls with no visible injury? Why are so many of the holes placed in the same region of the skull, even across continents, as if guided by belief rather than necessity? And if it was purely spiritual, why are there signs of clear surgical technique, careful scraping, clean circular openings, post-surgical healing? If it was symbolic, why do some patients survive and others don't? Why are some skulls trepanned more than once? Modern researchers have proposed everything from psychiatric treatment to cranial bloodletting, from ceremonial death rituals to early forms of shock therapy. And while each idea fits part of the evidence, none explain it all. In one 2007 study, anthropologists proposed that trepanation might have been used to treat hypertension or stroke-like symptoms, conditions we can now detect with machines but were invisible in ancient times. They pointed to the lack of infection in healed skulls as evidence of rudimentary cleanliness and surgical discipline. Another school of thought argues that no single reason ever existed. That trepanation, like burial or tattooing, varied from culture to culture, its meaning shifting across tribes, mountains, and centuries. In this view, the hole in the head isn't a singular mystery, it's thousands of them. Some neuroscientists have even explored the effects of trepanation in living tissue, measuring how cranial pressure changes, how brain oxygenation might improve in rare cases. But the ethics of such studies are thin, and the evidence is debated. We don't drill human skulls anymore without very good reason. And trepanation, as practiced thousands of years ago, does not meet modern medical standards. Even modern surgeons have differing opinions. To some, these ancient skulls represent early brilliance, a precursor to craniotomy, a symbol of human ingenuity. To others, they represent misguided desperation, a reflection of a time when the unknown was filled in with fear and faith. And yet, almost all agree on one thing. Trepanation was not random. It was intentional, repeated, structured. It left patterns. It left survivors. It left meaning, etched in bone. In the end, maybe the question isn't, why did they do it? Maybe it's, why did they keep doing it, even after it failed? The answer, perhaps, is found not in medicine, but in the shared human condition. When we hurt, we reach for something, an explanation, a ritual, a remedy. We want to believe that suffering can be changed by action, that cutting the skull might ease the burden inside, even if it doesn't always work, even if we don't fully understand it. We try, and in that trying, in that ancient, Stone Age attempt to help, we see something familiar, a flicker of who we are, and who we've always been. Science may never fully agree, but maybe that's the point. The skull holds its mystery, and some mysteries are meant to be honored, not solved. Your fire burns hotter than theirs. The smoke in your hut rises cleanly, pulled through a carved vent in the roof made just for your family. You don't cough in the mornings. You don't wake up shivering. You are the chief's child. And here, that means everything. When the hunters return, blood still steaming on their shoulders, the meat comes to your family first. Not the bones, not the scraps. The meat. The tender strip of deer back, the soft marrow-rich leg. You eat it hot, seasoned with salt pulled from the riverbank, served on wood that has never touched the dirt. While the others chew on boiled roots and scrape fungus from bark, you lick fat from your fingers. Your mother hands you a skin of warm water, and when you spill it, no one hits you. Your bed is raised, 3 logs high, stuffed with woven grass and dry wool. Your blanket is made from fox fur, the soft kind, the kind that still smells like the forest, not the fire pit. You've never shared a sleeping mat with 4 others. You've never heard your belly echo with hunger before sleep. You've never been tied down so a healer could cut your head open. Because here's the truth they never say aloud. You're not the one who gets trepanned. You don't get the blade. You get the blessing. When your head aches, The healer doesn't reach for his obsidian knife. He burns herbs and sings gently, letting the smoke coil around your brow. He tells your mother it's the ancestors visiting in your dreams. He presses his hand to your chest and says, "This child is touched by the moon." And that's the end of it. The pain will pass, he says. And if it doesn't, well, you'll be sent away to a clearer mountain for a while. No drilling, no cutting, no fear. When you fell from the log as a child and scraped your head, 3 people ran to catch you. Someone carried you to the hearth. Someone else boiled clean water. Another lit a cedar fire, not for warmth, but for protection. They made space for your injury. They made room for your healing. Down the hill, the boy who fell gets silence. He's told to sleep it off, to stop crying, to walk straight even when the world tilts. And when he doesn't, they call the healer, but not the one who chants, the one who cuts. In the same village, under the same moon, children live 2 very different lives. One grows up with tools in his hand, the other with stories. One is taught to dig graves, the other to trace the constellations. One eats frost-bitten berries in winter, the other drinks warm broth with wild garlic. And when the head hurts, when something shifts inside, when something unseen takes hold, one lies on a stone slab, eyes wide with terror. The other is laid in soft grass, rubbed with oil, sung back to sleep. This is the quiet truth of the ancient world. Pain did not belong to everyone equally. The poor felt it in their bodies. The elite felt it through others. Your name protects you, your bloodline, your father's seat by the fire. You will never be opened. Because if you are hurt, the tribe mourns. If the others are hurt, the tribe adjusts. You don't realize the difference, not at first. Not until you're older. Not until you see what they do to the others when they scream at night. Not until you hear the silence after the cutting stops. Then, one day, you touch the side of your head, just gently, and wonder, what would they have done if your name weren't known? When your head feels heavy, you are not dragged to the fire pit. You are led, gently, to the ceremonial hut, the one with the feathered doorway, where dried flowers hang from the beams, and every corner smells of crushed leaves and old stories. You are the chief's blood, and that means no blade touches your skin. Instead, the priests arrive, not in a rush, not in panic, but like the wind coming through the trees. Their hands are clean, their voices low. They carry no stone tools, just herbs and words. They place cool cloths on your forehead. They hum old songs, ones sung before the village even had a name. They ask not what hurts, but when it began. What dream were you in when the pain found you? What color was the air when your eyes opened heavy? You are not examined. You are interpreted. You are not cured. You are read. In your world, suffering is a riddle, not a rupture. And the priests are the ones who solve it, without touching the skin. They speak of ancestors, of energies caught between realms, of imbalance in the breath of the moon. Sometimes they wave feathers over your chest. Other times they draw signs on the ground with powdered ash, marks only they can understand. And while they work, others gather just outside, kneeling, waiting for the priest to say, "This child will recover." And you always do. But across the path, in the poorer huts, there are no priests, only the healer. And his answer is not a riddle. It's a procedure. He doesn't ask about dreams. He checks the skull for swelling. He looks for the pulse in the temple, the shaking of the hands, the stammer in speech. He has no words to explain it, only the memory of what happened the last time someone showed these signs. And what happened then was trepanation. You're not told what happens in that hut, but you've heard it. The low groans, the bone scraping, the way the birds stop singing outside. And you've seen the ones who walk differently after, their heads wrapped in leather, their eyes distant. They're changed. You, on the other hand, leave the priest's hut with honey on your lips and warmth in your limbs. You rest. You wake. And when you rise, your pain is simply gone. Maybe not from healing, but from protection. Because for people like you, the body is sacred. Too sacred to cut. And maybe that's the biggest difference of all. For the poor, pain is a threat to others. It must be removed, drained, controlled, no matter the risk. But your pain is something to be understood, not fought, explored. They believe your dreams are gifts, that your illness is not a curse, but a message. And messages must be translated, not erased. So they ask again, what were you thinking of when the pain began? Were you alone? Or did you feel someone near you? And you answer, because you must. Because to ignore the question would be to ignore the ritual. And ritual, to them, is stronger than any blade. In the end, the priests leave as quietly as they came. They offer no certainty, just calm, just presence. And somehow that's enough. You sleep. You are not opened. You are believed. You've seen it happen more than once. From the safety of your elevated sleeping mat, from behind the woven curtain of the chief's lodge, from the place where the fire always burns just the right temperature, you've watched them lead someone away. It's never someone like you. It's always a boy from the outskirts of the village, or an old woman who talks to herself. Sometimes it's the hunter who took a blow to the head and never spoke quite right again. They bring them to the stone slab outside the healer's hut, and the drumming begins. You know what it means. Everyone does. They never explain it to the children, but the sound carries through the valley. Low, slow, hollow. You pretend not to notice. You sit by the fire. You eat the deer meat. You ask no questions, because you already know the answer. And you know it doesn't apply to you. When the screaming starts, no one flinches. It is not your problem. It is not your fate. The women glance toward the sound for a moment, then return to their weaving. The hunters continue sharpening their tools. Someone might spit on the ground and whisper a short prayer, but even that feels like formality. And you, wrapped in clean furs, warmed by fire, with the smell of honeyed grain still on your breath, feel nothing. Not guilt, not fear, not worry, because you were born into the center of the circle, the protected place, the circle where heads are wrapped in cloth, not opened by stone. You ask your father once, just to see what he says. What happens to them? You mean the ones who go into the healer's hut and don't come out the same. Your father doesn't look up. He chews slowly, then says, "They were chosen. That's all. No further detail. No explanation. And it satisfies you, the way a riddle satisfies a child who doesn't want the truth. Because the truth would be sharp. The truth would be cold. The truth would be this. If you had been born one circle outward, just a little to the left of the fire, you might be the one on that slab. But you weren't. And so you sleep in safety. Days later, when the boy returns, head bandaged, eyes dulled, you see him from a distance. He walks slowly. He doesn't speak. The other children don't tease him, but they don't invite him to play either. He sits in the corner during meals now, chewing more slowly, staring at nothing. Some say he sees more than we can. Others say part of him never came back. You believe both, or neither. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it didn't happen to you. And so the world stays in balance. You carry the bow. He carries the scar. You walk into the forest. He walks behind the fire pit. You are praised for your posture, your clarity, your calm. He is avoided, not cruelly, just quietly, as if what touched him might still be near, like smoke that clings to skin long after the fire is gone. You do not worry, not even when your head aches, not when your vision blurs from long hours in the sun. Not even when the priest comes to check your eyes with a candle and murmurs something low to your father. Because even if something were wrong, you know the path your body would take. The soft one, the warm one, the path of herbs and humming and rest. Not the path of restraint and scraping. In your dreams, sometimes, you hear the bone cracking. Just for a moment. A sound like antler against stone. You wake and touch your forehead, just to be sure. And it's always whole. Always unmarked. You breathe out and remind yourself, you were born into protection, into name, into bloodline. You will never be the one they cut. And that, more than anything, is what it means to be safe, not the absence of danger, but the certainty that someone else will face it in your place. You will not be remembered for the hole in your skull. There will be no marks on your bones. No shallow grave with a trepanned wound studied by strangers 10,000 years from now. Because your pain, if it ever comes, will not be written in the body. It will be softened by priests, swallowed by fire, or lifted into story. You are the chief's child. You belong to the side of history that does not scar, where the suffering of the elite is never displayed but dissolved into chants, into tales, into air. The others, the ones with smoke in their lungs and ash under their fingernails, leave behind their skulls. Their bones tell the future what happened. They carry the evidence, the holes, the cracks, the signs of survival or surrender. They're examined, measured, preserved in museums they never imagined. Their suffering is archived. Their survival calculated. But you? You are remembered another way. Your memory becomes myth. When you fall sick and recover, they say the ancestors smiled on you. When you dream strange dreams, the priest says you walk between worlds. When your eyes darken with fever, they say the sun has entered your blood. And when you return to health, No one notes the pain, only the power. It becomes a sign, a future omen. A story mothers will whisper to daughters. She was strong. She saw spirits and lived. She was meant to lead. There will be no flint near your temple, no scraping of bone, no raw opening to release what cannot be seen. Your opening is symbolic, a word spoken in your name, a feather waved in the air, a fire lit on your behalf. You were healed with meaning, not with wounds. And so, your legacy becomes untouchable. When people speak of you years from now, they will not say, "She bled," or "He suffered." They will say, "She dreamed. He was visited. He walked through fire and emerged unburned." Your body will not be proof. Your story will be. Meanwhile, those without names are remembered only by the surgeon's marks, perfect circles and ancient skulls, surrounded by healing bone or sudden silence. They never became myths, only case studies, a cluster of data, a point on a chart. They are remembered for what was done to them, not what they became. But you? You are remembered as something larger. You become a symbol, not a skeleton. Your skull will never be found in a cave. It will never be studied under glass. When your body returns to the soil, it will be wrapped in fur, buried high in the hills, away from the digging hands of the future. They will not find you. But your story, crafted from praise, lifted by lineage, will survive. Because in your world, the elites don't leave behind evidence. They leave behind narrative. The difference is quiet, but profound. One leaves bone. The other leaves belief. That is your inheritance. That is your privilege. Not just protection from the blade, but protection from being reduced to the body. The others are remembered in pieces, skulls with holes, fingers worn by labor, teeth cracked by grain. You are remembered in full, a firelight memory, a voice in the air, a name passed down. And long after the bone cutters have vanished, long after the caves have been mapped and measured, long after the blood has dried into dust, your story will still be told. Because while the poor left behind scars, the powerful left behind stories. And stories, in the end, are harder to kill. We like to think we've evolved, that the blade and firelight belong to the past. That trepanation and chance have been replaced by sterile operating rooms and advanced diagnostics. And yet, when you strip away the machinery, when you mute the medical jargon and silence the hum of fluorescent lights, some truths remain unchanged. One of them is this: not everyone receives the same care. The inequality that once determined who lay on a stone slab beneath a flint blade and who sat safely beside the fire with priests murmuring blessings is still alive today, just dressed differently. In ancient times, your fate was tied to your bloodline, your name, where you were born. Today, your access to medicine still hinges on those same things. Not lineage, perhaps, but location, income, skin color, insurance coverage, and passport privilege. A child in one part of the world receives MRIs and preventative screenings before they ever feel pain. Another child, across a border, across an ocean, dies from an infection that could have been stopped with a few pills and a clean bed. This isn't new. It's just quieter. We have traded furs for scrubs, stone for steel, incantations for protocols. But the divide between those who are treated with gentleness and those treated with urgency, between words and wounds, remains sharp. In private hospitals, soft voices and comfort-first policies cushion the experience. Patients are seen as people, complex, layered, valuable. In overcrowded public wards, the tone shifts. Efficiency becomes king. The body is a chart, a room number, a task to be moved along. And just like in that ancient village, some people are too important to cut, while others are cut because no one took the time to ask if there was another way. Even the language we use reflects it. Some people receive care. Others get treatment. Some are seen. Others are processed. The same way the chief's child was swaddled in ceremony while another child was drilled open in the dirt. Today, we make invisible decisions about whose pain is worth pausing for and whose isn't. And what about mental illness? Once seen as spirits or curses, now labeled as disorders. But even here, the pattern repeats. In wealthy neighborhoods, therapy and medication are offered with compassion and discretion. In poorer communities, the same symptoms are ignored, criminalized, or misunderstood. One person hears, "You're suffering, let's help." Another hears, "You're dangerous, step aside." Different words, same divide. We don't trepand anymore. But we still open people up to scrutiny, to stress, to survival systems that punish the poor and comfort the privileged. One person gets a second opinion. Another gets a bill they'll never repay. One has access to prenatal care. The other gives birth on a concrete floor. One is operated on by the best trained hands. The other waits in silence until the room is available, if it ever is. And yet, just like before, those who receive the finest care rarely understand what it means to be without it. They do not worry. They do not wonder. They assume healing is their birthright. They assume comfort is standard. They sleep in metaphorical furs, surrounded by warmth, not knowing how many lie in cold places, hoping for someone to hear their pain. The ancient village is still with us, echoing through time. The fire of it is now a waiting room. The healer's blade replaced by bureaucracy. The child who got the deer meat is now a health plan subscriber. The one tied to the slab, still unseen. Still enduring. Still hoping to survive not just illness, but inequality. We tell ourselves we've progressed. And in many ways, we have. But the gap between who suffers and who is spared, between who is opened and who is protected, that gap has not closed. It has evolved. And if we look closely, we'll see. The chief's house still stands. The priest still whispers. The healer still waits with the knife. And the question remains the same. Which one will they call for you?